So a woman called Bushra, she was too excited. She was too excited to even know the cold, though this was her second winter in Edmonton. She came from Iran as a PhD student, and she was coming to her first ever interfaith dialogue, Christian-Muslim dialogue. As a young person, she had been curious about God, and what did it mean that there was our God, and then it was their God. And of course, her religious study teachers during the Iranian Revolution in Iran thought she had way too many questions. And the kind of dialogue she was coming to, she knew would not have ever been possible in Iran. So for us, this was our 6th annual dialogue, but she's coming with all sorts of worries. She wears hijab, she doesn't know if people are going to cause trouble with that, and so she's worried. So she comes to a table of 8 people. Turns out, us planners didn't do very well, and she's around a table of 7 Christians, and she's the only Muslim. And I quote from Bushra, "I'm from a conservative culture. They have icebreaker cards, and we're supposed to tell something personal about ourselves. But I'm from a conservative culture, so I did my best to ignore the little voice trying not to talk about personal feelings with 7 strangers. But the little voice vanished after one of the lovely sisters shared her sad experience of losing her husband. The sorrow, the pain, the emptiness, the confusion, and finally reaching God for help. What a familiar story. I felt every part of it, so similar, so meaningful. This was the whole point, I thought. Familiarizing with others, feeling the similarities, and believing how close we are in our faith. How we will all reach God for peace in the days of difficulty, and we can all find comfort in the warmth of His kindness." So then, her card said that she was to share her passion with the group. And now her words again. "Free from the little voice, feeling God's love stronger than ever, for putting my fears aside, sitting with His believers, trying to know them and be known by them. My passion." They talked theirs, and then there was more speakers, and there was more discussion. So that's just the icebreaker at the start of a Christian-Muslim dialogue. So for her, she said, this was the 6th time for this dialogue for other people, but for her, it felt like being part of a silent, ongoing social evolution that tends to make the impossible possible. So the icebreaker cards came from the Turkish community, a group called Intercultural Dialogue, and they do dialogues. And they have cards that help you establish a sense of common humanity before you start sharing about religious differences. And it makes quite a difference in how people's experience go. As you can tell, she already was transformed during the icebreaker before we ever got to the religious discussion. In our dialogues in Edmonton, the majority of our time is spent around tables just like here. And any other dialogues I had seen, you have speakers and then you have a question and answer time. And looking at it from kind of the communal hermeneutics that we think of as Mennonites, it made more sense. If you want people to get over their fear of Muslims, that you really have people engaging with Muslims instead of just hearing Muslims speak from the podium. And so that's been the whole difference in terms of the kind of dialogue that we do in Edmonton. Our mission statement of the group that I facilitate, it's called A Common Word Alberta, not to be confused with the bookstore out here. And we picked our name first, but anyway. Anyway, our mission statement is that we get together as Christians and Muslims to reduce misunderstandings and stereotypes that can come between us. And in a place like Alberta, with a fundamentalist kind of influence from America and a real pushback from the secular community in our cities, people are not very free to talk about faith at all. And so I always say this, sitting around the tables is like priming the pump to share your faith. And that's true for Muslims and Christians alike. And so that's how we work. So how did this get started in Edmonton? That's kind of the setting of our dialogues. The most fascinating is that it really started, one of the igniting strong places was with the earthquake in Iran in 1990, is that right? 1990? And of course, Mennonites wanted to do there what they do lots of other places, is they wanted to send in relief. And there was Mennonite women in southern Manitoba that made quilts, and they went to Iran because of that earthquake. There was a very high death toll, and but there was something about Mennonites that was different in terms of how they related to the Iranian authorities that were dealing with the earthquake. And at a certain point, and Gary Harder clarified this story for me yesterday, and he said that the Iranians became very curious about Mennonites, and at a certain point, I think it was 2000, there was a delegation of Mennonites who went to Iran, and it was the first time that Christian clergy had ever been in the religious center of Iran, which is the center of Shia Islam. And it's amazing that Mennonites were there. And we were. There was something about how we did relief work that invited us to be at the table as another religion in the center of Shiism. There's a couple from Indiana who ended up going to Iran, and I read their book called Welcome to Iran. And part of their orientation to go to Iran in the States was to meet with the U.S. ambassador, so the Iranian ambassador in the U.S., and to be oriented to life in Iran. And this was the height of enmity between the U.S. and Iran. And of course, we started a second round on that last week, after I decided to talk about Iran, and I said, oh no, here we go again. But, which makes it all the more relevant, I think. But this ambassador oriented them, and as they went out the door, he said, I want you to go to Iran, and I want you to go and shine like Jesus. Part of our uniting story. Well, isn't that an amazing statement? It blows away all our preconceptions of what the Iranian Revolution was about. Today, Harry and I were talking about all the amazing Persian people we know from Iran. And wonderful, wonderful people. So that's how the Iranian Revolution affected people. Wonderful, wonderful faith exchange faith with a Persian person is just a wonderful experience. So Mennonites got involved with that, and for a while there were Iranian students coming to Toronto, and at a certain point it became an exchange of scholars between Mennonite scholars in North America and religious scholars in Iran. And this has been happening for longer than 20 years. Okay, that's one of the places that things started. Another place is my story. And my story is 30 years in Burkina Faso, sent by Mennonite people like you here, and sent to a very poor country because it was poor, and ended up living for 30 years among Muslim people. Amazing experience, not very successful in church planting, but wow, what an experience. What a transformative experience for us as a family. And of course, led to later things. So after we moved from Burkina Faso, went to Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, did a master's in intercultural studies there, and while I was there, attended a first for me, evangelical Muslim dialogue. Was so impressed with the connections that were being made there. And it was obvious to me that the friendship that was being formed among those people was more important than what they were talking about together. And it was obvious that the relational piece was important. But I did ask myself, so what would a dialogue look like that had a Mennonite emphasis? And that's where I think we ended up more with people talking not with the experts, but talking together and learning to share faith together. Anyway, Edmonton invited me after my studies to come and work there. I came as a church planter because the mission committee was looking for somebody with some cultural and African experience, and I had that. So in a sense, by then, for a long time already, there was a passion within us to be relating to Muslim people, whatever that meant. We knew that the rest of our life was going to be hanging out with Muslims. And so they gave me that freedom in Edmonton to do exactly that. And just like in Africa, what do you do when you first move into a village? Well, you go and greet the imam. So that's what we did in Edmonton. We knew the first mosque was there. And so we went to visit the imam, and that started a whole relationship. For me, it's a wonderful place to be because the Muslim world is this wonderful cultural diversity, and there's Muslims from all over the world in Edmonton, and to be a part of that and to build relationships with them. So what happened was that one of these Shia Mennonite scholar dialogues was being planned in Winnipeg. People knew that we had a passion to relate to Muslims, so we were invited to that event in Winnipeg. And Lauren and I, they had to give us a role, so we were the host and hostess, and we did almost nothing. But what a spark that ignited, because what happened, so Dr. Shamali was the leader of the delegation. And he's been a key person in this all along. And at the end of the dialogue, I went to him and I said, you know, there's Shia mosques in Edmonton that I haven't visited, but is there somebody that you know in Edmonton that you could put me in contact with, because that would make more sense. I think that's a good Mennonite way of doing things anyway. It's better not to go cold, go with a connection, right? Well, wouldn't you know that his best friend, who he goes on pilgrimage with every year, lived in Edmonton. He's imam of a mosque there, and so I got the contact information, made contact with him, and lo and behold, started a whole series of meetings at Tim Hortons to get to know this imam. And out of those meetings, developed the whole vision to do something in the Edmonton community. And those meetings were amazing in that somehow there was a comfort with him to, so when you're relating in the Muslim community, there's a variety of things that can upset you, because there are old barriers. And there's disputes that have been between Christianity and Islam forever, and they rear their head when you don't want them to, and you get questions you don't have answers for, and all this, the junk that would come. Most of the relationships are wonderful, but every once in a while you hit these blocks. So I would take those hard things to him, and we would unpack them together. So I think he unstuck me in lots of ways in terms of my relationship to the Muslim community. And somehow it didn't feel safe to do that with others, but I could with him. So a tremendous man, his name is Usama Al-Attar. So out of that grew the first dialogue, and that happened at First Mennonite Church in Edmonton. And it's kind of a funny thing because there was no other Christians there, because I haven't talked to any Christians about doing anything, but I had connections in the Muslim community. So we had a Shia-Sunni Mennonite dialogue. So that's kind of like represent maybe 1 million Mennonites to representing 1.8 billion Muslims on the other side. I mean, it was not representative at all. But we had a wonderful time. Because people weren't used to dialogue, we had a variety of stories about dialogues or reconciliation that had happened between Muslims and Christians. We had Mennonite speakers, we had Sunni speakers and Shia speakers. And I remember the day that the Christian speaker spoke, and he's Jonathan Bornman, connected to David Shank, who's a longtime Mennonite person present in the Muslim world. And for his presentation, scholarly presentation, he retold the story of the prodigal son. And that's all he did. And it was about compassion. And how do you talk about God as a God of compassion? And how we are to be compassionate. And the theme was both of those. And he told the prodigal son. And I thought, oh my goodness, I thought I was talking about dialogue, but wow, we are talking about witness. This is a very, very powerful witness. And I think from that time on, I just worked at this like, okay, dialogue isn't different than witness. Dialogue is one authentic way of doing witness, and a very acceptable way to do witness in a North American setting. And of course, we have negative E words and others that we all have overreactions to. And maybe dialogue is just a better way to, for lots of reasons that we can be communicating. I don't think it's at all the only way. It's one that I've put some of my energy into. And then it was interesting how God seemed to want other Christians to be a part of this. Because I go to a peace walk that we do annually at Edmonton, and a Mennonite calls me over and says, you need to meet this guy. Well, he's the Catholic who's in charge of the Catholic Mennonite dialogue that's already happening in Edmonton. And he said, you need to meet this guy. Well, he's still one of my closest colleagues on the committee to do our dialogues. And that kept happening. Then there's a woman that used to, long time ago, be a Mennonite from southern Manitoba, but became Anglican years ago, but got interested in this and has been solid on that committee as well. And so those kind of things kept happening. Out of that formed two kinds of book clubs. One started with two book clubs, one North Edmonton and one South Edmonton. And we studied Karen Armstrong's book, The 12 Steps to a Compassionate Life. And very profound in terms of how we together, and very respectful of picking out of all the religious traditions beyond Christian and Muslim, about how compassion is general to all of our religions. And if we take them seriously, we'd be compassionate people. And so after we got through that book, the South group, I said, do you want to do another book? Or do you want to do another auction? Well, the other auction I put out there was something that I had learned Mennonites were doing in Toronto when I had been at that first dialogue in Winnipeg. So a woman from Toronto had told me about something called scriptural reasoning. Anybody heard of scriptural reasoning? Okay. So scriptural reasoning is reading the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim holy books together. And it was started by a Jewish man, I think in England, and is quite strong in North America as well now. And it gives us another option in witness, because we're reading the holy books together, and we're getting educated about Islam as we do it, all of which are good things. And so I explained what it was, we looked at it, and that Southern group decided they were going to do scriptural reasoning. And I think today that scriptural reasoning is probably the favorite thing I do every month. The book club and the scriptural reasoning, they meet every month. Because of all that happening, I got invited to a group of Shia women met. They were called Shifting Gears. And they just wanted to be open to new things. They didn't want to get stuck in their ruts. They were really strong Muslims, but they didn't want to be closed-minded. And there's nothing in the Quran that should keep you closed-minded. You have to take the Quran seriously, but you don't need to be closed-minded. In fact, knowledge is very, very important. Okay. So went to this women's group, and I was supposed to present on Karen Armstrong's 12 Steps. And the 12 steps of that book, the 12th step is forgive your enemies. And really the only good example of that is Jesus. And I said, okay, so we talked about Jesus saying, to forgive the people that nailed him to the cross. And I realized as the women were talking, all the steps, they were telling stories. And I thought, oh my goodness, these people are way up there in their steps of maturity. Their spiritual practices that they took very seriously had made them very strong and compassionate people already. I felt like I was sitting with my impression of what Catholic nuns would be like, just in so much spiritual practice. But these are people who had raised families and done real life things, and yet absolutely incredible. So a variety of things happened after that. I had joined the Muslim community quite often for Ramadan and spent time breaking fast with people in the evening and visiting mosques during Ramadan. And I thought, well, so how can I reciprocate? They've been hospitable to me. So I invited them to First Mennonite Church in Edmonton. And First Mennonite was open to this. And so in various years, we've had Muslim people come and visit us during either Advent or Lent, leading up to Easter. Some Shia, and if you know anything about Islam, Muslims don't really believe that Jesus was crucified. Well, there was some of the people from that Shia mosque had enough nerve to come to our Mennonite services on Good Friday, and they were touched by that. And of course, they have a whole ritual of suffering because of how their history went that they could identify with. So, you can never make assumptions on what people are going to be close to. I want to go back now to Bushra. The last year dialogue, that was her first dialogue, she finally understood why she had to leave Iran. She didn't need to leave Iran for money or for education, but she needed to leave Iran. She said, I need to experience more. I need to not be closed-minded. And she came to that dialogue, and she believed that once she was at that dialogue, she knew why she had left Iran. One other thing that happened because of the dialogue, last year, as we were leading up to the dialogue, my colleague at the local mosque got a letter from Pakistan. He had seen our event on Eventbrite and had thought, boy, you guys think you need a dialogue in Edmonton, you should see how much we need one in Pakistan. So he went to town, and lo and behold, he invited all the imams he could find that lived around his Catholic church, that had mosques all around the Catholic church. So he's a Catholic father, and they decided to respect us, and they had their dialogue the same day as we, just I think a couple hours later. And so then they sent us a report. They wrote down everything that they talked about. We had a full report of this dialogue in Pakistan. So this spark suddenly did something in Pakistan. And these imams were delighted that a Catholic father had got them together to talk about things in their neighborhood. So just one example of how these things can go. At First Mennonite, we had, there's people that do English classes with me, where there's lots of Muslims who come from the other Mennonite churches. But First Mennonite in Edmonton has been kind of a leader in being involved in the things that I do. And so we've had a vegetarian potluck. Last summer, talked about Shia Sunni history, to understand that. We explained Mennonite history. And then during Ramadan, a group from First Mennonite went over and gave Ramadan greetings. And you know, those times give me a lot of joy, because I think this isn't just me doing my thing. This really is collective witness, right? And they just said it was just so wonderful that you were part of our Ramadan experience, and that you came from the mosque just across the way to do that. So all very exciting. One last story about Bushra, and then we're going to turn it over to questions. So this spring, my husband was in the hospital for the first time. I didn't like that at all. It was, I really liked what I'm doing. They were saying it was a stroke, and strokes are really scary. And oh my. Anyway, I was not doing very well at all. But Steve Bell was coming to town. I had it on my calendar. And my husband said, you know, I was probably getting grumpy. So he said, I think you should go to Steve Bell. And I thought about, so when I think of going to Steve Bell, it's kind of silly to go to Steve Bell alone. So who would want to go? Well, for some reason, Bushra came to my mind. I called Bushra and I said, Bushra, you want to go to Steve Bell? He says, who's Steve Bell? He says, well, he's a popular Christian singer. He sings about God. Didn't know what else to say. So, and Steve Bell can do just some fun, goofy stuff, and he can do serious stuff. Well, it turned out he was in a Catholic church, so he was still Steve Bell, but he was pretty mellow. And Bushra and I were both there. She had come off of a horrendous job experience, and she just needed to reconnect with God. She was in a marketing job, and she felt like she had betrayed God. She had betrayed herself. She wasn't true to herself, because she was telling people lies about these products, because that's what the manager had said she was supposed to do. And she said, every night I go home, I think of the people who put money into these based on my lies. And so Friday prayers, she would go and beg God for forgiveness for the sin she had done in this marketing job. Well, she did the job for 8 days and finally gave up. And she needed a job desperately. She says, money can't be more important than me feeling right with God. Well, Steve Bell did some of his best, and a lot of psalms. So there was laments, there was praise songs, and we both together cried through the concert. And she had to leave. Her husband was waiting for her outside in the car. And I said, sorry, you can't talk to Steve Bell about your concert. And she said, do you think he would be upset if I told him that this was as meaningful to me as it is to Christians? I said, I think he'll be just fine with it. So afterwards, when I had a chance to talk to Steve Bell, I told him what. I said, there was one Muslim woman that was here tonight, and she really enjoyed it. Anyway, let's go to questions, discussions. There's, I mean, I could have lectured you on all of the points that come out of this. There's lots of really complicated questions that come out of what I'm doing.